go. Hustle hard, hustle every single day.
This is Joe Styler with domainacademy.com. Thanks for joining our mini-series. We hope you've been enthralled with the first few episodes, and today we have an exciting topic to cover. How do you actually sell names? That's where you make your money. So we've got a special guest that's joining us today, and before we turn it over to him and start asking questions, I want to have James, our co-host, introduce himself and say a few words about our special guest.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, I'm James, Domain Investment Community Manager. And in this series, we've been looking at the building blocks of domain investing. Like Jay said, we've been looking at valuations, domain buying. So we're focusing on selling this time. And we've got a very special guest in Alan Shiflett, who's the Senior Product Director at GoDaddy for Domain Investors. Alan is a real expert in the domain name aftermarket. So we're very excited to have him on, get some insights into not just Afternic, not just GoDaddy's offering, but the aftermarket in general and how to sell domain names and some of the top tips that he's learned over the years. So, Alan, can you just say a few words about your history and how you've come into the domain industry and where you are now?
Yeah, so I've been with GoDaddy for 15 years, and almost all of that has been in the aftermarket. I actually started in the call center at GoDaddy, speaking Spanish and answering phone calls in Spanish, troubleshooting websites and hosting problems, but quickly transitioned over to Premier Services and moved out to Boston with the Afternic acquisition. And I love the aftermarket, the ability we have to connect with sellers who are trying to be entrepreneurs and make successful businesses themselves. And then on the buyer side, talk with potential buyers who are trying to buy a digital identity that's going to change around their business. It's really inspirational. And so I love what I do. And I love that I've spent 15 years doing it and love talking about it.
Good to hear for a podcast.
We're excited to have Alan because Alan's run Afternic from the sales side and now he's on the product side. So he really has an intimate knowledge of how domain sales work and what the best practices are. So I'd like to start out by asking you, at a very basic level, if I'm just a normal person who's got some extra domain names in my account or somebody who maybe is new to domain investing and just has one or two names that they're starting out with, what would I do if I wanted to put those names for sale? What's the best way for me to start to list those so people can come and buy them?
Yeah, we try to make it as simple as possible. Ultimately, you want to get your domain name so it's on the Afternic network. Afternic is similar to MLS in the United States for housing. So in the United States for housing, if you want to list your house for sale, you list it through a broker who lists it on the MLS system. And typically buyers have never heard of the MLS. A buyer will go to a site like Zillow, they'll go to Trulia, they'll talk with an independent agent through Keller Williams, but they don't know of MLS itself. And that's what Afternic is. Afternic is specifically for sellers, not for buyers. So you list it in Afternic, and it gets distributed to over 100 partners at places like GoDaddy, at Network Solutions, at over 100 registrar and partner sites where buyers are going to find domain names. And so in order to list your name for sale on Afternic, there's a few different ways you can do it. Through your GoDaddy account, you can list it for sale through your DCC, your Domain Control Center. There's a list for sale option there. That allows you to update the pricing and control it from there. You can also land over on afternic.com and list it directly from there. And it's a pretty seamless process. Once you list it there, it then gets distributed to all of those partners for visibility.
In terms of visibility, so exposure is definitely a really important factor in that. But aside from that exposure and distributing it to various partners, what are the other factors to consider when you're listing a domain for sale? What do you need to do in order to give yourself at least a decent chance of a sale?
Yeah, you want to make sure to put a bin price, a buy it now price on the domain name. That's because most of the domain names are selling in the $3,000 to $5,000 range, and often are impulse purchases. So they land on GoDaddy, for instance, they search for the domain name and they'll add it to their cart and purchase it. If you add any friction in that process, for instance, making them have to make an offer first before they can purchase, your likelihood of having a sale is greatly diminished. And so putting the buy it now price is the most important thing you can do when you list it. After that, you want to opt your domain into fast transfer. So you get increased distribution of the domain name when it's in fast transfer. Plus, it's easier to fulfill for both you and for the buyer. Typically, whether you're registered at GoDaddy or one of the big registrars out there, they're all in the Afternic network, and you can opt your domains in through your registrar. I would also recommend updating your DNS. So just in like the housing analogy that I was describing earlier, not only do you want to list it so people can find it on the websites, but you want to put up a for sale sign so that as people are driving by, that they'll be able to see that it's for sale. And by putting your DNS to a for sale lander, that enables the traffic that visits your site to see that, hey, this name's for sale, and to be able to take action at that point. And so updating that in all those three things, the bin, the fast transfer, and putting your DNS are the top three things that I'd recommend doing.
So let me just make sure we understand this right. So you talked about real estate in the MLS, which is the multiple listing service. So if I put my name or if I put my house for sale, I tell my agent, and then they put it for sale on MLS, and then anyone who's looking for a house with their own agent or Zillow or wherever can just find that where they're looking. And that's how Afternic works. And that's a big benefit for Afternic. I put my name for sale, like you talked about, either through where my names are in my GoDaddy account or at afternic.com. And when I put it for sale, then it joins that network. But to get a wider reach on that network or a better chance of selling, I should have a buy it now price put on that name. And then I need to also change my DNS, which I'm not sure, most people know what that is. So can you explain a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah. So when I say DNS, I'm referring to name servers specifically. So within your domain control center or your registrar partner, you can update where your domains points by updating what's called the name servers. Super easy to update. So to use Afternic name servers, you would just point to ns1.afternic.com and ns2.afternic.com. Within the Afternic Control Center, you can update which lander type it goes to. So I know often there's questions of, hey, which name server should I point it to? All those conversations are old Afternic before we had this platform that allows you to select the lander inside the control center. So while there are old name servers out there that you could use, and they will work, ultimately they all go to the same place, which is that central system that says, which landers should I go to? And you can control those landers within your Afternic account. Mm-hmm. So you update your name server. Right now, the default lander is request price. So someone would land on there, fill out the form. We also have a bin lander of just the buy now price. That's a GoDaddy buy it now. They can instantly purchase. And then we recently launched a custom lander, which allows you to use lease to own, allows you to have make offer, and still has the buy it now option there.
The custom lander is super cool. With the three different types of landers, how do you choose which one is best for your domain names? And I think that this is something that is not only beneficial for new domain investors, but maybe established domain investors. They've been focusing on maybe a request price for a long time, but depending on the price range, depending on your evaluation of the domain, you might choose a different strategy in terms of land. Let's take request price lander to start with.
And I guess maybe stepping back, James, I would say that everyone has different domain names. And so what works best for my portfolio might work differently for Joe's portfolio. And that might work differently for James's portfolio. And so it's important to look at your specific portfolio and even test it out over time. So request price specifically, though, what you're asking about, so I'll give recommendations, but keep in mind that these are broad recommendations. A request price specifically, I would use for a standard registration. And in particular, I would use it for names priced over $10,000. And the reason behind that is oftentimes those aren't going to be impulse purchases. Those are going to be people that are going to need to get funding or talk to a partner. And you don't want to immediately lose them by having them land on the page and seeing a price that potentially could scare them away and say, oh, I'm going to go with a different TLD. Having the ability where they fill it out, now a sales rep's calling and consulting with them, and we continually follow up with them. So we make sales 10 years after the initial lead form is filled out. The reps continually follow up with it. And they try to do it in a respectful manner, so we're not overloading them. But we make sales years after they fill it out. And so typically I would recommend that the average domain name be pointed to that, but definitely over $10,000, you should point to a request price.
And that's because you can create a conversation with a broker, and it's always, it tends to be a slower process when you're talking about those higher figure domain sales. Like you say, they need a little bit more time. So that makes sense. So say you've got a domain under $5,000. We're talking about domains where we're looking for less friction involved in that purchase process.
Yeah.
We've now got two options at Afternic, buy now and the custom lander. They both show buy now price. So how do we differentiate which option to go for?
Yeah, so our end goal is we actually want to get both of the landers into the same lander type. So eventually, I imagine they'll go away and it'll just be the custom lander as we do further experimentation. If you're looking for just a buy it now, you're not going to offer make offer or lease to own. The buy it now lander is optimized solely for buy it now right now. It looks different. You can use custom lander or just buy now, but that wasn't the original design of custom lander. So I wouldn't typically recommend it just for buy it now alone, although it is very good at converting. It is very similar. Where I would use custom lander is when you're offering lease to own. And lease to own is incredibly beneficial. A lot of buyers will come in and they can't afford to pay the full buy it now price. They're a small business that just started up and they want the domain name, and that domain name will make an impact on the success of their business, but they just can't afford that upfront cost. And lease to own allows them to pay for it over the course of many months and increases the velocity and the overall revenue that you get from your domain names. And so on the custom lander, it adds that ability for the end user to say, hey, I'm going to pay for it over time using lease to own. And so if you're offering that path, custom lander definitely gives you a huge advantage over the bin lander because it'll convert greater than the bin lander because of that additional option. And then the last part of the custom lander is you could also have make offer on it. Typically, I recommend using bin plus make offer as opposed to bin plus LTO plus make offer. We're still experimenting to see how we can measure this better. But the hypothesis right now is that when bin plus LTO and make offer are all three there, there's a paralysis of making a decision there, and there's too many options. And so if you have make offer where you're open to having offers accepted, and you also don't want to deal with as many of the tire kickers of let's say price request landers, you can have the bin plus make offer or the bin plus LTO plus make offer, or just the make offer. It's custom, so you can customize it for what you want. And that makes so the end user has to put at least your minimum offer into that make offer field for you to get the lead.
And once those leads come in, where do they go?
Yeah, for the make offer ones?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so right now, they go to the same brokers that manage the price request leads, so the GoDaddy brokers. We are in the process of working on self-brokerage, which will give you the ability to manage those leads yourself, which we expect to launch in Q1 of 2025. So coming up here in the next few months. And that will give you the ability to still manage the lead, but also forward it over to a broker should you decide to do that.
Yeah, that's good that we have a lot of options. I think that, it gives you an option if you really feel pretty savvy and understand that you can take your own leads. And if not, you turn it over to ours. And our brokers, one of the things I like about them is that they're always working because we have a team all over the world. So they have a lot more hours than I do to respond to my own leads. And they also speak more languages than I can speak, routed to different people. So that helps as well.
But also then they're not afraid to get on the phone.
Right.
Just going back to the brokers for a minute, what difference does it make to get on the phone? Does that increase the likelihood of a sale?
Yeah, we know when we engage with someone over the phone that they're much more likely to purchase than if we just engage with them through email or SMS or chat. You're able to get much deeper in a conversation with someone when you're talking to them live, as opposed to talking them through another medium. So if you think about the way that you text with friends, you cover much less of a topic in a text message than you do if you're having dinner together, or if you're having a phone call. And that's important because you can't get to the root of what the problem is of them not wanting to buy the domain name, what the objection is all the time through a text message. People might be more reserved, or through an email. Whereas when you can get them on the phone, you can ask sincere questions. They can understand that you have their best interest in mind too, and can help them understand the value that domain provides to them specifically.
Yeah, I think it's definitely beneficial when you're having a conversation with people. So let's switch it up a little bit. We started out with somebody who just has some extra domains or is just starting out. But what if I have a lot of domain names? What things should I be doing in bulk to make sure that I'm taking advantage of the best that Afternic has to, sell my names? Was it any different if I'm a bulk seller?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar. The best practices are the best practices, whether you have one domain name or whether you have 20,000 domain names. But you definitely want to make sure that you're paying attention to your fast transfers and that you're getting them all opted in. It's much more difficult to manage. We're trying to make that easier in the future, but making sure that you're going in there, you can do an export of your full portfolio. Right now, if you have under 100,000 names, it lets you export it from the Afternic control center. And so that gives you the ability to see all the statuses. You can compare it to your registrar sites to make sure that if you have names registered in 3 different registrars, that all of them have made it over to Afternic. And then making sure that you have the settings that you want on all the domain names, making sure you have a bin, that you have LTO, the names are in fast transfer. That's easy to view in the control center, also easy to view in the export.
What do you think is the main thing that people aren't doing that they should do? I know it's probably one of the things you already mentioned, but what do you see is the most common thing? So I'm looking at my portfolio, I'm in there, I want to make some changes. What should I look at? What's the most common things that people forget to do?
Yeah, I'd say right now, the biggest thing, and who knows if you're listening to this in a year, it probably will be something different that people are missing out on, but is lease to own. We launched lease to own, we acquired Dan, and it was one of the main features that we looked at while we were going through that acquisition, and the technology and thought process that was put into that. And we rolled it over to GoDaddy and actually improved on it, where at Dan previously, buyers could only pay in the currency that the seller had selected, which was either USD, British pound, or euro. Now at GoDaddy, they can pay in any currency that GoDaddy supports, which there are quite a few. And so it makes it much easier for anyone around the world to get a lease to own. We also, when you have lease to own, it shows up in the GoDaddy purchase path. So it reduces the friction of someone acquiring your domain name through the GoDaddy purchase path, which is a huge value add. And so we did this with NameFind, where we enabled all of the NameFind portfolio under $100,000 on lease to own, and we chose 25 months as after doing some analysis for the type of names that NameFind has. We chose 25 months as the right number of max months, and so that would be the biggest thing, that if you're looking at what's something that you might be missing out on, that if I'm trying to be broad across a lot of people, LTO, particularly among smaller sellers, might be something that they haven't looked at.
So LTO, you mentioned that for NameFind, so NameFind is GoDaddy's own portfolio that we do a lot of testing with and experimentation. You mentioned that we stuck with 25 months, but you go up to 60 months. Is that correct? So
yeah, you can go up to 60 months.
Or 2 to 60.
Yeah, you can definitely, for 1 month, it's just buy it now. But yeah, 2 to 60.
How do you gauge whether you are a 24-month or 25-month or a 36-month seller? For example, my portfolio, I've got a few singleword.io domains that are priced fairly high, and I want to make them a little bit more accessible to people.
Ultimately, it's hard to make a bad choice. You can choose whatever level of risk you want to take. 25 months NameFind chose because of the average price of a domain in the NameFind portfolio. And so it made sense just from a reconciliation standpoint when you're managing 1 million domain names to be able to keep everything consistent with the maximum number of months. It's easier than having a bunch of random different months that are out there. So the disadvantage, the longer you go, the higher the cancellation rates do become. But at no point in that does it become less profitable. So the way that 60 months, you get the extra 30% markup applied, which gives you the 15% commission. So in essence, you're selling the domain name for no commission. And so that helps to cover for any cancellations that might be increased from having those longer months. But a lot of people don't want to have their domain name tied up for that long before being able to just have it passed on.
And so in terms of lease to own, you mentioned that there might be a good way for new investors to go.
Mainly, I was just trying to call out that if you're a new investor, you might not have this enabled on your account because you just haven't had time to review all the settings.
So there's some really cool settings in there that you can set your default values by. It takes out some of the work for you in terms of setup of your domains, right?
Yep. Yeah. You can go into your settings section and choose the default LTO months. You can choose your default lander type. So that way, when you add a domain name, it just automatically takes those settings on it, and you don't have to worry about going in and manually updating it. Makes it way more convenient.
I think one of the cool things about LTO and also inside your Afternic account, especially if you're a new investor, is that it gives you a good real world feedback on the types of names that you're choosing to invest in. If I'm doing a lease to own, I might, get more purchases that happen. And if so, then I can see that I'm doing a better job because, with a big portfolio, you're going to see purchases quite frequently. With a small portfolio, it's just the numbers game. So you're going to see less. So this gives you one extra option to see that there's some interest in the names that you're picking. And also, one of the things we didn't talk about is if you're inside your afternic.com account versus being where your domains are inside your GoDaddy account, you have a lot more data that's accessible in your dashboard. And one of the things that you get to see is the number of visits. So you get to see how many people are coming to your domain name in the last 30 days. And that's really helpful just to kind of gauge, is anyone even showing up to look at my name? And it's not necessarily a one-to-one correlation of if the name is going to sell or not, but at least it gives you an idea of, am I picking names that people are even looking at? So I think that LTO is cool for that. And we also have some other things built into Afternic that kind of can give you some feedback on if the names that you're choosing are good.
Yeah, I think one of those things that gives them that feedback is the lead center. And you can see the total number of leads in your portfolio view, but being able to see people who actually filled out, how many people actually filled out saying, hey, I'm interested in this domain name in addition to the traffic is a valuable signal to know whether you're choosing names that people are interested in.
How would I get a lead into the lead center? Like what settings would I need? Obviously, if I just have buy now and that's all I use, then I'm not going to get a lead. The name's going to sell or not. So what types of settings would I use where I need to keep an eye on the leads that come in?
Yeah, request price is going to be the one that gives you the most leads because every person who's interested has to fill out the form. That being said, even if you don't use request price, you still may get leads through the partner network. So someone might call in to a GoDaddy call center and say, hey, I'm interested in this domain name, and they'll reach out to that GoDaddy broker, and that will get input as a lead as well as other partners. And so you'll still get some leads, but if you want to get the most amount of leads, it's going to be from the request price page.
Yeah, that's pretty good to know. I think that's great inside knowledge. So it's another good reason why we have you on here. And speaking of inside knowledge, as you just took over the product, you have an idea of kind of the direction that things are going. Is there anything that you can share, like exciting stuff that's coming up? You already hinted at a couple of things that are on their way. So is there anything else that might be coming up that people could learn from the podcast?
Yeah, the self-brokerage is something that I know a lot of people are excited for. To be able to use the GoDaddy branding on a self-brokered page is something that's going to be really powerful. After that, we're working on next year creating the ability to self-serve a lot of the items that are friction points of managing your portfolio. So, for instance, a name might get opted out. Let's say that you transfer your name from one registrar to another. Your name will get opted out because the registrar that you opted it in at is the one that controls that. So they can't give permission for the domain to transfer anymore because it's no longer registered with them. And so next year, we're going to make it easier to self-serve that. So you transfer a domain from Dynadot to GoDaddy or from GoDaddy to Network Solutions. It opts the domain out of fast transfer. You'll be able to say, yes, I still own this. It's at the new registrar and I want to opt it in at that registrar. So you'll be able to self-serve a lot of those points that today you'd have to reach out to a support team.
I know that there's a lot of people that are really interested in that. Beyond that, looking at like your general view of Afternic and the aftermarket, Where do you think things are headed into 2025 and beyond?
I think we're trying to just make things simpler. Our main focus is first on the buyers, because ultimately you want your domains to sell. And so we want to do everything we can to increase the likelihood that someone will buy one of your domain names. So optimizing that path. But we also want to be cognizant that it also makes it easier if you are able to manage your listings better. And so we're going to be able to focus on that after we complete the DAN migration that's going on right now. And we complete these final items right up to finish up 2024. We'll be able to pivot our focus and say, how do we continue to increase sales velocity for buyers to buy domain names? And how do we make it easier to manage your portfolio?
Before we end, is there anything that we forgot to ask you that you think is important that you like to share?
I think at the end of the day, domain investing can be difficult. It might not be as consistent as one might hope. And it's one of those things that the more that you research, the more that you dive in and understand it, the more successful you're going to be. So utilizing things like Domain Academy to acquire good domain names, you're not going to be able to sell good domain name. You're not going to be able to sell domain names if they're not good domain names. So it all starts with acquisition. So learning how to spot and value a good domain name and acquiring that name is going to be fundamental to how you sell. And I know in past weeks you've had conversations about that, but really selling starts with buying great inventory. And once you do that, now you're able to fine tune and say, how do I optimize my portfolio? But just stick at it, be patient, walk before you run, and you'll do great.